Now, you're very welcome back. So we had on Meath's Emma Duggan and their manager Eamon Murray last night. So later this hour, we're going to hear from Mick Bowen, the Dublin manager, ahead of the All-Ireland football final between Dublin and Meath. And on the GAA front as well, I should mention Paddy Andrews and Andy Moran have been brilliant all summer. So their podcast on the back of the weekend is up now on the OTB SPORTS app. It goes up first there every Tuesday. It's everywhere else by Wednesday. So I'll be listening to that later on this evening, I suspect. And we're going to stay with Saturday. So obviously hurling final build-up will take the stage for the second half of the week, and there'll be lots of Mayo, Kerry and Tyrone talk after that. But with the dust settling on the weekend, we're going to take a big picture look at Dublin. To do so, none better than Conor McKeon, GAA writer for the Irish Independent. Hi, Conor.
Hi, Joe.
And very happy to say Declan Bogue, GAA writer as well, is with us. Hey, Declan.
All right, Joe. All right, Conor.
So, Conor, there was something very elemental, visceral about that epic game on Saturday night. I presume you were there. Did you manage to get in, yeah?
Yeah, I did, and it was, the cliche that was going around the crumbling of an empire. It was actually very sort of fitting, and it was quite gripping to watch it as well. There was, there was something very end of days about it. I think if Dublin had been caught with a last-minute goal, I think maybe the post-mortem would have been very different. But the sense of finality, I think, about the manner of the defeat, it does. I know from talking to some former players who were around at the start of this run and who aren't there anymore. And even for them, I think it kind of feels like the end of that era, whatever that era was. And whatever comes next for Dublin will be something different.
I think that's a great point. I think that if they had lost in a slightly different way, the post-mortem would be less bleak for them. But there was something very final about it, Declan. And I don't know, this great empire, like a great white whale, if they were a heavyweight, it was the equivalent of blind punches being thrown, staggering, all composure lost, just a sense of desperation. It had that feel extra time.
Absolutely, that was the chaos that was unfolding in front of us, and the line that James McCarthy suddenly looked an old man. I mean, could anyone have even thought of us saying that 6 months ago? Could anyone have even thought of us saying that 2 months ago, a month ago? Just looking through the team, that it's just clear that. And we're saying this in the context of Mayo beat them. There is no guarantee that any other county in Ireland could have beaten Dublin. It's just that Mayo have been up against them so many times, especially with James Horan there. And they've got new wheels in the form of the old McLaughlins and the O'Horas. And I know he wasn't there at Oisin Mullen. He's just gone for so much pace and so much athleticism around Donaghy. You're just looking at Dublin sending on the different subs, and without any, there's nothing new in saying this, but Sean Bugler and Aaron Byrne, Tom Laheff, Robbie McDade, they're just not the Kevin McManamans, they're not the Byrne Brogans, they're not even Cormac Costello's coming on and frightening teams anymore. Philip Mahan coming on, just again the stuff that Eamon Fitzmaurice said the other day, that Philip Mahan had talked about, the potential of being away at Bogues. Now, I know that was sort of under a little bit of misinterpreted, but there was just some things just seemed just off with Dublin this year, just not at where they were at before. But again, you have to put it in the context of this was Mayo, the hardest running and the hardest hitting team in the game. And would there have been any other county that might have beat them on Saturday night in normal time, or if it had just been over in normal time? Doubtful. We don't know that. But it just looked, crumbling empire is about the best description you can get when you see the leaders and all the kind of people who dominate their areas just getting into silly things. James McCarthy's elbow into the neck and so on.
Yeah. Conor, we'll look ahead to the future, because ostensibly that's what this chat is about. I want to get a sense from you of what kind of talent is coming through. But just to stay with the Dessie Farrell era thus far first for a moment, I was listening to Paul Flynn was giving brilliant analysis. He was on Second Captains this afternoon, and he was saying he noticed the standard slipping this year in various ways. So look, we all saw the performances weren't what they had been, but he was saying the smallest little things, like take discipline. Declan mentioned discipline there. He was saying he was noticing Dublin players committing cheap fouls against the lesser teams, by the way, not against Mayo here, but committing cheap fouls this championship instead of making the lung-bursting run to make the honest tackle. And of course you're going to get away with that for a long time, but he said, you know, our standards, and he was still saying our standards under Jim were about those little things, and that Jim Gavin would often after games have clips on discipline, so they never let it slip. It was a constant thing they were honing, and he was of the opinion that these small things culminate in a kind of dramatic capitulation. And on the discipline front, if you continue that theme, I mean, it completely capitulated. So what about the standards, those small details over the last 18 months? What have you seen on that front?
Well, I mean, the thing that Desi inherited, I think he was well aware of what he was getting himself into in terms of what was going to happen with the team, that it would break up. And his initial challenge was to keep as many of the elements together as possible, which he did. And you have to remember, Dublin won the All-Ireland last year in Desi's first year without conceding a goal. So, you know, whatever drop in standards were there, they weren't there last year. Clearly they weren't there last year. It was the easiest All-Ireland Dublin ever won. But I think, like, he's been unfortunate, Desi, in a lot of ways, because now, like all the other managers who took over in 2019 or 2020, that their preparation time has been affected. I think Desi at this stage would have liked to have moved this team on a small bit. But a couple of things went away against them. The first of which is that, you know, you have to ride the wave of what you have. And he inherited a team that had just won 5 All-Irelands in a row. So, you know, you weren't going to go around killing golden calves. Like, these were the proven winners. And whatever way that Desi wanted the team to play and whatever kind of players he wanted to pick, to me, was slightly limited in that. And then the other thing he had was 2 very fractured league campaigns with big sort of lockdown breaks in the middle of them. So in terms of cultivating new options, he didn't really get that chance. But on top of that, there is no doubt that the flow of talent that's coming from the underage ranks in Dublin is not quite as talented as it was before. The individuals are not quite as good. Like, Jim Gavin always, habitually, every season, shook up his team. He brought in somebody new. There was Paul Mannion, there was Brian Fenton, there was John Small, there was Brian Howard, and all of those players made immediate impacts in year one. And I think Desi has given 6 championship debuts to players over the last 2 years, and none of them were good enough to start on Saturday night. So I suppose it's a very long way of saying that he went back to the same players because they were tried and tested, but also because he didn't really have any other choice. Like, you look at Johnny Cooper there, or John Small, or Owen Murchan, they spent a lot of the season injured. And there was no doubt that they were going to be put back onto the pitch when they got to the business end of the championship. But equally, there was no doubt that they weren't quite at the peak of their ability. Under Jim Gavin, that might not have happened because they would have had better options there. Their squad depth was an awful lot better. And I think as well, the style of play that they had, it didn't really suit the better players on the Dublin team. And when Mayo came out to hunt them down, as they did so well in the second half, they didn't really, that was the most jarring thing to me, was that they didn't really have any recourse. Now, you could make the point that if you had Jack McCaffrey on the pitch, all you needed to do was break one tackle and the whole pitch would open up for you. But Dublin didn't. And when it came to playing direct, the thing that possibly could have hurt Mayo, they didn't seem to be able to do it. They were literally driven to the point and beyond the point of distraction. So, you know, the thing about Desi Farrell is he now has the opportunity to go through every element of the team's structure, how they play, the players are there, his backroom team, and he now has carte blanche to do exactly what he wants. And I think he probably has postponed doing that until now.
Because, Conor, I find it very surprising to hear that there isn't an array of talent to pick from. I mean, if James Horan has managed a transition of sorts here fairly seamlessly, I just would have to think there's got to be, I mean, you scour Dublin, there've got to be brilliant young players coming through in Dublin. No, I find that astonishing.
Well, if they are, they haven't sort of really made themselves visible just yet. Like, there were definitely a couple of players off that under-20 team. Kieran Archer was one, like a really sort of talented scorer, but who probably needs to learn the kind of grittier side of the game for a forward. There's one or two, but I suppose my point is when Conor O'Callaghan was 19 or 20, everybody knew he was coming. The same with Brian Howard, the same with John Small. So they don't have the same pedigree. Now, I've sort of couched this with another thing, or another observation about Dessie Farrell as a manager, that when he was in the underage ranks, he was actually far more successful with the teams that had less talent in them. I think, he was able to mould them a little bit better than, the teams where he had outstanding players, where you had to kind of play through them the whole time. So that's why I think Dessie is in a better position than an awful lot of people would expect now, because he has a very strong idea about how he wants the game to be played, how Dublin want to represent the thing. But I suppose to answer your question, if Dublin do come back in the short term and are successful again within the next year, 2 years, it won't be because 3 or 4 really outstanding young players have just sprouted onto the scene and regenerate the team.
Okay. And sorry, Declan, I'll bring you in here in 1 second, but just one other follow-up, Conor, because you mentioned a point there which I think is very relevant to Saturday, which is that when Mayo started pushing up and Dublin persisted with this possession game, and it seemed like just a bad idea. I mean, if you're pressing up and you've got a team who are passing back and forth and you can really load up on them, I mean, that's what you want. You don't want them to suddenly go direct, Jack McCaffrey or no, but there's got to be, by definition, space further up the field if you go a bit more direct. Is it kind of surprising that that tactical message didn't happen across the remaining 55 minutes of the game? Like that's sort of on management, I would think.
Possibly, but the other thing was, my read of the game on Saturday, and I've watched it back, was that really Mayo's setup in the first half was designed to keep them in the game and not concede a goal. And that resulted in a 6-point deficit. And if you're Dublin and you're 6 points up, particularly if the team did have any sort of self-doubt from what happened earlier on in the Leinster Championship, I'd say you're kind of sitting pretty happy with that. And even by the second half water break, okay, they hadn't scored then, but they still had a significant lead. So, no team has used the halftime break better than Dublin over the last few years. If you go back to 2019 against Mayo, I think they were 2 points down at halftime, came out and blitzed them in the second half, changed the way they played. And I think they fell victim to the very thing that did for them in the past. But, was it a tactical failing? I think Dublin knew at that stage they were so wedded to running the ball, to keep in possession, to try and attract Mayo onto them. That the couple of times that they did kick the ball away, it actually just looked like players trying to hoof the ball out of their way, which is sort of almost unbecoming of a team with that success.
Yeah. Declan, what's your read on the 2020 All-Ireland that Dublin won, and then where it left Farrell in terms of his options, in terms of putting his own stamp on things? Do you get the sense he's just been in that tricky David Moyes after Ferguson position where it's very difficult to tear up the script? Actually, Moyes made the mistake. It's an interesting comparison. Moyes made the mistake of getting rid of all the staff and doing things very differently, and the players didn't like it, and it went kind of kaput very quickly, and he was only in the job about 9 months. I guess it seemed like Dessie almost kept a lot of the same approach and took a if it's not broke, don't fix it attitude across 2020. But that's such a strange All-Ireland. It's hard to read too much into it as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a bit like the time that the Cork Hurlers are coming off the back of enlightened management teams like Donal O'Grady and then John Allen, and then they decided to impose a different style of kind of manager upon them. Like they had played a certain type of game back in we're going back almost 2 decades now, but the running game in hurling was a revolutionary thing, and then it had to be designed and sort of shaped by players like Ben and Jerry O'Connor, rubber stamped by Donal O'Grady, and then continued on by John Allen, and then Cork County Board says, well, we're going to go another different way, and that led to one of the strikes. And in some ways, there's a little bit of that about Dublin, like the basketball style, like after the Dublin, or after the Donegal defeat in 2014, Jim Gavin went to the All-Stars tour in Boston that year, and I believe, I could be wrong, but I think he went to 2 of the basketball games, and there was a lot of basketball chat in the lobby, and shortly after that, it could be the year after that, but anyway, Jason Sherlock came on board, and they became this team that had high and wide offence, and what you had to do was get past the defender to open up that pitch. And if you had Kieran Kilkenny and later then Conor O'Callaghan steaming through the middle, Brian Fenton came along at that point too, James McCarthy, these huge, powerful big geldings of lads coming through the middle. And then all you needed was forwards to come round in the loop. Mannion, McManaman, Brogan. And that's exactly the way Dublin set themselves up. So, it was a new style for Dublin, a new style for Gaelic football. And then soon they figured out that was the best way to break down all the kind of defence, the mass defences, and beat the teams that tried to do a counter-attack on them. Of course, Desi didn't have the time to tinker too much, I suppose, with it. If he wanted to make any big adjustments, then he didn't have the time to do that. It was just a matter of, okay, let's get through this season. And they won that All-Ireland off the fumes of the 5 ones that went before that. This year, I don't think it's so much that Desi wanted to change everything. I just think that if you suddenly have a dressing room and there's no Mannion, there's no McCaffrey, there's no Michael Dara McCauley, there's no Paddy Andrews, there's no Kevin McManaman. These are huge figures. And no matter what, it's like, when they talk about when big lads, big sort of figures and characters come into a dressing room and everybody's performance and training increases by 20%, there's no way that a lot of the young Dublin lads wouldn't have been coming in and seeing those kind of figures and trying their best to impress these legends that were going before them. All of a sudden they're cleared out of a dressing room. Your standards in training drop. Your standards then on the football fields drop. And I think it's more of that. I don't think that it's been a huge strategy shift or a way of doing things, a philosophy. I just think it's simply a panel that has grown old, shed all its sort of big leaders, and all of a sudden it just comes to a head. And so, it's like Mighty Oaks collapsing, really.
Right, okay. So am I speaking for both of you? Are you Conor, first then, if Jim Gavin was still manager, Dublin don't win this All-Ireland. Is that what you're both saying?
I would think so. And, I would say that Jim Gavin, who was always thinking a year or two ahead, not that he kind of got out while the going was good, but I think he probably saw that this stage of Dublin's evolution, that was not really going to be the thing that he could influence, as well as maybe somebody else coming in and having a different look at it. So no, I wouldn't say any of the blame is on Dessie Farrell. But just on that subject of the squad, I remember after the 2017 All-Ireland final interviewing James McCarthy, and he spoke about it's a cliched tale, but it was true that the A team had lost by a point to the B team the previous Saturday. Yeah. And I did a bit of rooting around, and I found out that the forward line for the A team, or for the B team, was Paul Flynn, Dermot Connolly, Kevin McManaman, Bernard Brogan, Paddy Andrews, and somebody else ridiculous as well. And I was only thinking the other day, what must the Dublin A versus B game have been like last weekend? Because there's no way. Yes, Dublin still possess 4 or 5 of the best footballers probably ever. But what are they coming up? And you're just talking about slight dip in standards. If that is your sort of your arena for preparation, there's no doubt that they're not being pushed in the same way as they would have done before.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I guess when you list off that B team, Declan, I mean, Jesus, me and you would have a shot at winning the All-Ireland with that team, with that squad. Maybe that's a once-in-a-generation thing. The next Dublin manager may have to make do with, mere mortals and, the best financed county and the most populous county in the country. And so, harking back to the 2017 version is, stretching things a touch. I think that's almost freak generation. So, the next Dublin manager, Dessie Farrell, very much the man at the moment, still has a lot of cards to play, I would think. I'm amazed we're kind of saying, oh, no culpability here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I always refuse this talk that the Dublin manager's job is the hardest job in Gaelic football. I've always, it's actually, it's not even my idea. It was a conversation I had with Rory Gallagher, and this goes back about 10 years ago. He says, how on earth is the Dublin manager's job the most pressure? He says, you have all your players living in the capital. Everyone's living within about 15-20 mile of their training field. You have them in home, in bed, before 10 o'clock any night you're training. You have all the resources, you have all the facilities you want. It's the easiest job. It's the easiest job. And while there might be a lot of pressure and a lot of scrutiny that comes with it, there's absolutely no way that they couldn't make a real good job of this. Like, Desi has a chance now to go away and have a good winter's contemplation, a real look at the club championship. And you can't tell me that there's not players out there. Now, what is worrying is the lack of Owen Murchan in recent times. Even Jack, like, going back further than that. But, like, Owen Murchan landed and just blew everyone away with just his ball carrying, his skills, all those kind of. John Small came in, and I know that, like, whatever about the conversations or people are having about John Small, like, he came in and established himself as one of the meanest backs that you could ever try and get change out of. Like, there's definitely footballers in Dublin. It's just about shaping them, and he might have to have a little shift now in how he actually plays the game. But, like, you cannot tell me that a team with a spine of Byrne, Small, Howard, Fenton, McCarthy, next year I'm talking about Kilkenny, Conor Callaghan, cannot win the All-Ireland. With that accuracy with Dean Rock, and having had a wee bit of downtime too. That's what they always say about a team with a long unbeaten record, is when it finally goes. Like, in some ways, it's like a massive relief to them, and they can just go away now and have the winter rather than just be in everyone's faces all the way to the All-Ireland final.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't for a second be ruling Dublin out of the race to win the All-Ireland next year. I think it's important to put proper context in the conversation that we're having. And the conversation that we're having is that Dublin are not the dominant force in Gaelic football, as in they will not go and win the next 5 All-Irelands, regardless of whether they win next year or not. So that's the thing that's the era, I think, that we're signing off on. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if it took a year or two for Desi to actually shape the team into what he wants. But definitely the raw materials for the team itself is there. The reason I picked the bench from the 2017 All-Ireland final is because that is the extreme example. That is the one extreme. Like, how could a team that has that amount of talent not win an All-Ireland? But I think if you look at the Dublin squad next year and over the coming years, it would be much more comparable with their rivals. But, like, I'd be surprised if Dublin didn't win an All-Ireland in the next 3 years.
Like, so would I. I mean, and I think they should, really. Finances, population, the squad that's already there, and all of the things that were going against Desi Farrell in terms of preparation were also going against James Horan, who was trying to sort out effectively a brand new team. And, again, this is why I'm surprised at the lack of kind of optimism about the talent coming through. Like, Apora Gohora is just found at a certain age, and you can polish up a diamond, and, like, the thing about, I heard a few people saying, well, the conveyor belt is slowing down in terms of what they're winning. And so I just had a look back to check, and, like, at minor level, Dublin, their only minor success in the 21st century, the most successful century of all time for Dublin, their minors have won an All-Ireland once, 2012, and the one before that was 1984. So we can dismiss, like, winning minor All-Irelands when people talk about that as important for Dublin. And then at under 20 level, I'd like a touch of a slippage, but I mean, so they won the under 20 All-Ireland 2010, 2012, 2014. 3-year gap then. They won it in 17, and they've been in finals in 19 and in 20. So, like, this sense that the conveyor belt, again, I've heard people say it, not necessarily you, but that it is slowed down at under 20 All-Ireland level and minor level. I don't really buy that. Like, I just can't buy there's not really, really good players there. And I don't know, I wonder if, like, there's no Conor Callaghan coming through. Like, are that a little bit spoiled talking like that? Like, there's no, superstar of his generation kind of coming through. There must be brilliant players there. I wonder, like, is there a sense of, God, unless someone's so obviously better than everybody else in the country, that we don't have anything here?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, I mean, we have to contextualise the conversation that we're having. Will Dublin have good footballers? Yes, they will. They'll absolutely be able to put out a good team. And I think it's worth recalling as well, like, when you have one of these kind of post-mortems or analysis sessions, it's you tend to treat the current situation with this degree of permanency. Dublin are gone now, and that's the way it is. But I remember I was in the studio with you and Rory O'Connor the day after Dublin beat Mayo in that All-Ireland semi-final in 2019 when they completely overpowered them in the second half, and Con destroyed Lee Keegan. Fenton he just ate Mayo in midfield. And if you'd have said then that in 2 years' time, Mayo, without Colin Boyle and Keith Higgins and Cillian O'Connor and with Aidan O'Shea being taken off, and with David Clark gone and Tom Parsons, would beat Dublin in 2 years' time. A Dublin team that still had Con and Kilkenny and John Small and Fenton. You just would not have said that, because it was impossible to see. So that's what I'm saying about Dessie Farrell. I think, given the freedom to do what he needs to do now, to mould the team into the shape that he wants to put it into. I think that Dessie was very much in a situation where he had to keep going with what he had.
Yes.
And he would have been unwise not to do it. And I just can't think of somebody who knows the scene and those players better than Dessie Farrell to do it, because he'll take the loss hard. Of course he will. Like, he wouldn't be human and he wouldn't be a competitor if he didn't. But I think it actually makes Dublin a much more interesting story over the next couple of years to find out how quickly he can turn it around and how he goes about doing that.
Yeah. So perverse to say this, Declan, but listen to Conor there. Perverse to say this about someone who's won All Ireland, but in a sense his era really starts next year.
Yeah, well, that's the test. That's the test of it, isn't it? What do you do? How do you reimagine? How do you do like you do back in the day in Croke Park and go away and dream it all up again? I actually don't think there's going to be that much. I can't see them adopting a hornball type approach to things. I can't see them becoming a counter-attack. I would say that it's tweaking and refining, seeing who he can unearth, and really, like, he'll not overcomplicate it. It's not like he's going to go away and become this wildly different tactical approach. He will just play the football he was playing with the minors. There's almost a house style with Dublin. So, I mean, you couldn't go away too much of it because it's been so successful. I just, if there is to be a wild departure, it would be next year if they lost heavily to a team in the league. You might see some big changes then, but I'd say it's more refining, tweaking.
Who's your favourite? Like, I'll put my neck on the line. Dublin are the favourites for next year's All Ireland. Who do you have as favourites, Declan?
Yeah, that's a good shout. I've never thought of that conversation yet, but that's a damn good shout. Yeah, I would say Dublin. Yeah, absolutely.
Conor, who are your favourites?
I would say Kerry, because I half expect Mayo to win the final this year, and I just really do expect that Kerry team to start winning All Irelands sooner rather than later. Now, it might be...
And like Mayo to still be on the sauce this time next year, is it?
Well, put it this way, I wouldn't back Mayo to win the All Ireland the year after they do win the All Ireland.
Yeah. One other thing, Conor, because it's surfaced a few times over the last few days, and I guess it's inevitable when Dublin lose, but the COVID breach. There was like some talk in the Sunday Independent a few weeks back that maybe it was part of Cluxton's unhappiness, and again there was a degree of speculation in the piece. To be fair, it wasn't reporting it as definite, but it had said, that it heard whispers, was kind of the thrust of that piece. It kind of resurfaced again, like, was it a divisive issue in the squad? I've heard everything from, it was divisive. A lot of very serious men in that team were genuinely unhappy at very serious rules being broken at such a worrying time, and others have looked in and said, we just stop, like, that was forgotten in a minute.
Yeah, I don't know, but I'd imagine it's closer towards the latter. Like, if Dublin were back training when they shouldn't have been, like, the big scandal was that we found out about it. So, did they go back training, and the people who were supposed to be unhappy with that were already unhappy before the story kind of broke? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I would imagine in a situation like that, personal choice will come into play. And I think the group is kind of big enough and adult enough to respect fellas who make a decision not to do that sort of thing. But I don't know, because, in a perverse way, I thought maybe it would get more out of Dublin this year. You can do the siege mentality thing. It'd be easy for a manager to say, look, everybody, well, you could at least tell the players, everyone's back training, we got caught and we're being kind of victimised here. But, the other thing that we haven't spoken about, and it's the most obvious thing in the world, is I think if you keep winning All Irelands at that level and your season is that long and it takes that much out of you as a player, and clearly it does take an awful lot out of them, because otherwise you wouldn't have players opting out in their playing prime. I think eventually it just grinds you down.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing for me from that match on Saturday night was just by the end, Dublin looked completely spent. And I think, if we did a fitness test this day next week between the two squads, I'd be fairly sure that the Dublin team would compare favourably against the Mayo team. But by the end of the game, the level of energy that was in the two teams was gone. And for me, there has to be a touch of the kind of psychological just tiredness about it, I suppose.
Yeah, going to be interesting. Like Mannion, by all accounts, playing great club football.
Yeah, he scored 2-4, 2-5 against Lucan last week. I spoke to somebody who played against him, and the people who were at the game were all saying, "There's a guy who could walk onto the Dublin team." But look, that's the other thing. When you win that much, fellas, can you, like, that was the big thing about Jim Gavin when he was there. He kept looking for more every year from players, committing more hours to the thing, committing more time, more energy. And I'd say he probably got to the end where he couldn't really stand in front of the group and ask them to give even more again. And I think there'd be definitely people within Dublin GA that weren't surprised that Saturday came.
Yeah.
Even if it was maybe a little bit on the extreme scale of what we all expected when it would come to an end.
Okay, well listen, it's going to be so interesting over the next couple of years. I mean, Dublin to rebound and win 6 of the next 8 All-Irelands, for all the talk of conveyor belts slowing down, so we'll see. Conor McKeon, thanks so much. Declan Bogue, great to have you as well. Thanks so much, fellas.
Thanks, Joe.